Okay, so I'll start. I just want to first thank everyone who's listening and viewing this. I'm really, really excited to share out. This is, it's specifically about engagement through retrieval practice through like a small classroom research project. But I'm going to talk about designing that style of research project as well because it was incredibly transformative for me as a teacher. I'm going to give, and it seems kind of long, but I think that I was testing it on friends, and I think 1 minute is too short. So I'm giving 2 minutes. And if you just want to think and write down, you can write it into the chat if you guys want to connect with each other, or also. But what is something you'd like to explore more in your teaching practice? So that is my question. I'm going to give a little bit of think time, and I just want you to think in your teaching practice, if you're a teacher leader, what's something you would want your teachers to explore more of? It could be something like attention, it could be something like memory, it could be engagement, it could be writing. I'm just now it's down to a minute and a half, but I'm just gonna respect that. I see engagement, student-led activities in the chat, routine for better engagement. I have such a good story for that that if I have time, I can share Oh, I like this one. Engagement throughout all subject areas, including and especially in subjects that are not their favorite subjects. I like these answers. I like them. About 4 seconds. Okay. So when you're listening to this, I want you to think about what you were writing down. I want you to think about designing your own project. My goal would be for you to be able to kind of take this back to your own classroom. And so I'm gonna start with this. Um, a little bit more about me. This is my 14th year teaching. I went from college, got a master's, and immediately started teaching at the school where I am. I'm at Episcopal Academy, which is an independent school, pre-K 12, west of Philadelphia. Um, and that kind of plays a role into the story of how this was born. A few pictures here. So I'm a Spanish teacher, and so whoever wrote like in subject areas where kids are not as interested, a lot of kids do not love Spanish. They don't. They like me, I like to think, but they don't love my class. They will tell me that very honestly. I've been teaching Spanish for 14 years. I've taught all levels. But I would say about 10 years into it, and I'll get into kind of what I think was the cause of it. The relationship with my students in Spanish started to change. And so I think about what a mentor once told me, and I think this is like a riff off of a football quote, but it's like there are no football coaches, there are people coaches. And I went from feeling like I'm not a Spanish teacher, I'm a people teacher. And so when I started running into issues, um, I turned to this book, Uncommon Sense Teaching. I swear I get no money. They get no money for me. I get no money from them. But it was a brain book that kind of helped me think more about the brains of the students that I was teaching. And then on the left, you can see the picture. In 2020, my older son Drew was born, and then in 2024, my younger Pierce was born. And when I think about good teaching and why I do projects like this and why I'm so excited about doing projects like this, it's for those two because I really think that the classroom is such a special place and I want teachers to be really empowered. And I want to feel really empowered. because you're working with people's most important, I don't want to say possession, but part of their lives every single day. And so having teachers, like even just being here is so incredibly important to be thinking about our practice. So that's a little bit more about me. I'll get into my story. I find storytelling to be really powerful in the style of project I have. And so we'll see. So when I like to start out, so I also, in addition to being a Spanish teacher, I work as a coordinator in our school's Center for Teaching and Learning, where we basically do a lot of teaching support. And so this slide, I kind of grab from it's a slide that we use commonly, and it's I like to call it "Why is teaching so hard?" But it's Lee Schulman, an educational psychologist's take on what teacher expertise is. And so if you look to the right of this, you see a lot of things I think that you can learn in school. And I mean, I'd like to say that you can learn in school, but teacher expertise is curricular knowledge, understanding the curriculum. It's understanding your content. So I'm a Spanish teacher. It's understanding Spanish, how to teach Spanish. It's understanding, pedagogical knowledge. How do you actually teach? And then how do you teach the specific content? So these are things that, like, we all know as teachers make teaching really, really hard. I think what becomes challenging and really tricky with, though, the idea of like you can learn this in school is that on the left side of that, you see that there's knowledge of learners, educational context, and educational ends. And that's basically like you have all of this stuff that you know about teaching, but where you specifically are makes a huge impact on the effectiveness of what you're doing as a teacher. Um, and so, for me, I'm a Spanish teacher, but I work in a pre-K to 12 independent school that's been here since, I mean, not on this campus, but it's been in existence since 1785. I would say that our students are not incredibly playful. You have to kind of convince them to be playful. They might be more skeptical. They are pretty competitive kids, and I say this like with a lot of love. I love these kids. But their goal, their major goal is to go to the best university that they can. And they feel a lot of pressure. And being a teacher in that context, you think, well, how lucky. But sometimes it's really difficult to be in those situations, and try to plan like the perfect lesson. And so when you're thinking about kind of an intervention, and when I'm thinking about engagement in a class like a Spanish class, where often play comes into, play can be really fun. It doesn't always work. And so you have to be really thoughtful. And so, that's why teaching, I think, is so hard, according to Lee Schulman. And then I think about my own situation, and what has happened. And so I think, especially as a Spanish teacher, in the past few years, you have this age of AI where you feel the pressure of using AI. And for me, it's kind of like convincing kids that Spanish is important or language is important is getting harder. And you have research, if you look at the glasses, like, you have the research coming out of telling you what the best things that you can do are. Um, and that can be really challenging, to kind of be like, does this actually work for me? And then you have this idea of like, just do it. I started teaching 14 years ago. When I started teaching, and maybe this was just like me being young and naive, I felt like all I was a teacher. And now I feel like I wear so many hats, and there are so many other things that I have to take care of, with students now. And so this idea of like, just do it. And I have a really supportive admin, but we just have a lot of things that we need to do, and like programming that we work with our students. And so there's a lot of feelings. I think a lot of teachers have a lot of feelings about different things. I have a lot of feelings about a lot of things, and I'll be very, vulnerable here. There was a period of time a few years ago where I really thought about getting out of teaching. I thought this isn't for me. I could do something else. I feel stale. I don't think that the kids are getting a lot from me. And it was kind of disappointing. And so, I had a really hard class, and that kind of inspired this project of retrieval. And so, what I did was I was lucky enough that the school sent me to the Learning in the Brain conference in Boston. And at that conference, David Daniel, who, if you've never heard him speak, is really fun and irreverent. And he kind of stood up and yelled. and was talking about how there's so much research coming out, and yet none of it's based in your classrooms with your students. And why aren't you doing the research with your own students? And I thought this is brilliant. Like, instead of just like letting all of this kind of pass, me by, why am I not really doing anything? And so he introduced this idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is essentially a systematic inquiry into teaching practices and student learning with the aim of enhancing it. And so, um, I thought I have a really difficult class right now, which I'll get into in a moment. Why don't I try some of this? But to give you a little bit of background of how you run one of these like in-class studies for a SOTL project, and I'm going to use the word SOTL, they should be grounded in context. This is like number one most important thing. These are grounded with your students in your school. They are methodologically sound. So you're using actual data. You're using data that is testing the intervention. So it doesn't always have to be testing. It doesn't have to just be testing, but you're thinking of ways around your intervention. In my case, that we'll be talking about with my Spanish class, I used actual assessments that I did not write. I took assessments that were written by a co-teacher. I kind of said like, you are going to be writing the assessments. I'm going to blindly take them. She was really, she was happy to do that. I feel now that I'm saying that it sounds like I was like, you're going to write the assessments, but it wasn't really like that. They are in partnership with students. I think this is really important. When I started the SOTL study that I did that had to do with retrieval practice, I actually told my students what I was doing. I told them that I'm going to be doing a project, that they are going to be used, and that I explained to them about brain science and I explained to them about retrieval. And I said, I want to see what's going. And instead of students kind of being weirded out, they were really, really excited to kind of see what new techniques were happening. And you want to make it appropriately public. I don't think teachers are great at self-celebrating. And so when you're doing a project like this, you want to think of ways that you can kind of let other people know. It could just be dropping a line on like a Substack. It could be getting in contact with really so many people that are doing these things. But you want to be like just share out what you're doing. Um, and so the real question is, are our students in a lab? Not really. I mean, like if you think of this as like an experiment or an investigation, I think the first thing that comes out is like the students are they in a lab? Are we doing this? The truth is that everything that we do is kind of an experiment. A book that you choose is an experiment. And like, you're investigating like, where you stop and start your year, like everything is. So when you see what mine was, it kind of feels like lab-ish, but it's really, really not. And so uh, this is how it kind of starts. And so something that I would say is if you don't know where to start with a project like this, think of it like this. I have a problem with, I'm curious about, or I'd like to see if this works. All of those are basically thinking of like, what are you going to be looking at in a classroom? In my case, I had a problem with student memory. I was curious about retrieval practice, and I'd like to see if a retrieval in class worked, a certain way of retrieving in class worked. I use student assessment as my data, but you could use rubric assessments. You could use checklists. You could use a variety of things. I did another one that I was really proud of this year where I just counted. It was like a behavioral counting one. And it goes back to that initial chat. It was a routine that I thought was really neat. But you're just collecting data on your intervention. And so this is kind of my story. So basically, I'm going to present it as the problem, the intervention, the data, and the insights. And then once you kind of see that, I'll like leave some time for questions, but this is really kind of the meat of my SOTL project. So the problem was essentially this. I teach at a school that has 55 or 70-minute blocks, but I'm a Spanish teacher. That for me is not really great. I would rather see my students for 35 or 40 minutes daily than 55 or 70 minutes when they're kind of dropping here and there. So I'll see a student on a Monday and then not till Wednesday, and then Thursday I'll see them, and then Friday I won't, and then I'll see them back on Monday. And it's not consistent. Um, I was having attention issues with my students. They weren't really paying attention. I had a lot of different personalities in that class. They were kind of focused on a bunch of different things. They would come in, they would be like really high energy or really low energy. They, but the main one was that was driving me crazy was they could not remember anything. And that actually to me was like the what kind of put me over. I was like, I was going in every single day and it was like nothing was sticking. They weren't totally interested in Spanish. A lot of the students were very much like, we're here because it's a requirement, but after this year, we're done, which, is fairly normal, but it makes it a little different. I don't know if, there's a subject where students but are always just like, we're going to keep on going. But with this one in that year especially, they were really just done. And then there were gaps of knowledge. Spanish 2 for us is a freshman and sophomore course. And you get kids from different schools coming in. Sometimes you get kids from our middle school. Sometimes you get kids who took Spanish 1 at our freshman year level. So essentially, not everyone had the same experience. And I think that that's a really common problem for teachers. In fact, I think all of these problems that I'm mentioning here are common problems for teachers. But the biggest one was memory. So essentially, I would come in every day and it would be like Groundhog Day. Like I would teach a lesson. I will be honest, I thought it was beautifully crafted. I would use it as a warm up for the next day. And what would happen? They would be like, I have no idea. I would give homework, still no idea. And it kind of drove me nuts. And this is when I kind of turned to like the cognitive science and basically of retrieval. And this idea of retrieval came out, and I had heard about retrieval, I knew about it. But I thought there's got to be a better way to be thinking about retrieval than just, okay, they're gonna remember without actually looking at notes. Um, and so, I did kind of a see, think, wonder. That was like my next move. And I looked around my class and I'm teaching, I'm teaching, I'm teaching. And I'm noticing that they are writing really beautiful notes. For as much energy as the class had, they wrote really beautiful notes, but they weren't listening to anything I was saying. So if I would say, get out your notes, if they would come and meet with me and I would say, get out your notes, they would give me the notes. The notes were aesthetically great, um, but they didn't know what anything meant. And so I thought about this and I thought, I don't want them to be writing notes anymore. I don't think it's effective for them, but I don't want to give them notes either. I don't know if that's effective. And so basically, I thought about the research and I thought, okay, well, if we know that working memory has limited capacity and they can only juggle a few things at a time, and then we think about attention domains, and I'm thinking specifically like about the idea of like orientation, attention. So like where are students looking during the class? And kind of like a mixed hunch from me being like, I think when they're writing down, they're not listening. So I'm going to change this a little bit. And so I came into class, and this was my intervention. This picture is my intervention. I explained to them about retrieval, and I explained to them about what I was thinking. And I said to them, you have a new rule while I'm talking. You are not allowed to write notes. You can only listen to me. And I said, the only time when you can write notes is when you see a picture of a golden retriever on my slides. So I would add this picture of a golden retriever, and I explained what retrieval was, being just trying to remember something without any aids. And so basically, what I would do is I would present my lesson for about 8 minutes, and then they wouldn't be writing, they would only be listening. And then I would say, okay, here's a picture of a golden retriever. For 1 minute, you're going to write down in silence what you learned. And they would do that. And then I would say, okay, for 30 seconds, you're going to compare with your partner what you both wrote down. and they would kind of talk out the concept together. And then we would do a share out, and it kind of became a routine that we had in the class, to the point where like they named the dog Sprinkles. I have no idea why they named the dog Sprinkles. If I would just use like a generic Google image of the dog, but if I used like a different image of a different dog, they would be like, that's not Sprinkles, that's not the dog that we know. And so that was what I had them do. And I had them do it. I started it kind of right after that learning in the brain. I was already thinking about it, but then when he was saying that we need to start doing this, I thought, you know what, this is really, I think I'm going to try to do this. And being in a place where I am, I was supported by a lot of colleagues who said, yeah, just try it. Let us know how it goes. And so that was the intervention. And I thought, well, does this really work? And that's where my friend's test came in. And so I would not look at the test. I had not taught Spanish 2 before. I had not taught that version of Spanish 2. So I didn't know what the tests looked like. I would give them the test blindly. So the test would come to them. So it's not like I was teaching the test that I saw. And I would see, and that's how it was all year anyway. So I would not look at the tests. Um, and these are the results. And I think the results are pretty interesting. So the hardest part, I would say, of the course were the quizzes. So that's, so I put quizzes first. So you can see in Unit 1 and Unit 2, I did not use this intervention. Unit 3 is the first place where the intervention started. And you can see a little bit of a trend moving up. So you go from like a C plus-ish average to a like a B minus, and then a B average on quizzes. Written tests, you go from a C plus, B to honestly like a B plus A minus. In Unit 5, I did not give a written test, because it was just the end of the year, and that material ends up on the final exam. But what I really want to note are the two individual quiz averages. I'm highlighting here my weakest student and one of my stronger students. The reason I'm highlighting those two students is because I want to kind of emphasize that this type of intervention didn't just work for a weaker student. It worked for a stronger student. So you see the weaker student was getting a 60, 63. This is consistent also on tests, and a lot of different areas of the class, to an 80, 74, 77. That might not be a huge deal, but that student was in jeopardy of failing this course probably, before this intervention. And then you can see that student 2, their quiz average, you have 86, 88, and then 90, 96, 96. Both sets of students incredibly pleased with where this went. But really, really powerful stuff. You can see the written test, they like, all went up. And it kind of dawned on me, and we had this discussion that, well, of course they weren't remembering anything in class, because I never made them remember anything in class, because they could always just look at their stuff. And so basically, it has been incredibly transformative. That's the data. And just presented a different way, if you want to see, it's clearly going up if you look at the written tests. The quiz averages of those students, this is just in a graph form, but you can see that it's a trend. It's enough that it caused a lot of attention, for them, and they felt, really happy, to the point where a lot of students told me, they were like, we never actually knew how to study, until we had to do something like this, which I thought was incredibly profound. And for honestly, probably, for many years, I added to that problem, not explaining this to them. Um, Something that I think is pretty neat was that the students are given at the end of the year student feedback. I think that one of these are doubled, so I apologize for that. But we're given student feedback. Um, and when one of the questions is, what is something that my teacher does well? That is how the question is stated to them. And this is how they answered it. And it was really it made me so happy as a teacher that they weren't talking about like my jokes, which I think can be really funny, or the fact that like I like to think I'm a nice guy. Like so many of the comments, this isn't even all of them, but so many of the comments um came in about this intervention specifically. And I think that's why it's incredibly important to have kind of a radical partnership with students. Not only did they now understand studying, did they understand their brains a little bit more, and they felt like a part of the process. But they felt like they had a, immense pride in their scores and kind of what they were doing to the point where some of them said like I'm going to continue in Spanish next year. I think I can actually do it, which for me is, ultimately very very profound. And so when I think about like what are insights that I had from this project, the first is that, attention is important. It sounds silly, but it's like, where are we thinking about our students' attention? Like, I think my next project, I don't necessarily want to do on attention, but I would be doing something I would love to do something where it's like, how do you kind of take the attention and move it? I think partnership is key. I did another study this year that had to do with a song, a kid song, that you would sing to like 3 and 4 year olds. And I did it in Spanish, but I did it with my seniors. I taught a class of seniors who really did not want to be in that class, as kind of a ritual and routine, for them to speak Spanish. The results of that were kind of crazy. If I did sing the song, they would only speak English maybe like 8 times. If I didn't sing the song, it would be like 35 times. And the reason I highlight this partnership is key. I think it's up to you if the partnership is key. With this retrieval one, it was super key. On that one, I did not tell them I was doing a project because as soon as I would tell an 18-year-old that they're getting, that the song is like kind of a project, I think their like teenage adolescence would have pushed back on me. Um, so the partnership I think is key. However, I did tell them at the end of the year, and they thought it was pretty cool too. So I still partnered with them just in a different way. And that, if you're a teacher, if you're a teacher leader, if you have a friend, I think who is experiencing kind of like fatigue or burnout, these projects, I think, are such a great way to transform us as teachers and kind of professionalize a profession that sometimes, I think people sometimes view it as um, I don't want to say less important, but a lot of people think, okay, well, you can get up and just I'm a good speaker. Just because you're a good speaker doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good teacher. Or I give a great speech. My wife works in corporate, and it's funny. I think about, she does these presentations, and I say to her, I'll say, imagine that you're doing your presentation, but everybody actively is telling you that they don't want to do the presentation today and that they would rather just go outside. And so, and it's not a knock on that. It's a very different world. And so I think it's physically taxing. It's really hard. It's a really busy job. And so doing a project like this can kind of uplift teachers in such a beautiful way. Teachers that I know that I've worked with on creating these projects in-house have been so excited to see their results. And when they survey the students, they're really excited and they're so excited to share out. And it has really brought a lot of joy to people. And so, when I think about how do you get started, if like this is something that's interesting to you, start with a question, a curiosity, something really simple. Think about something you're already doing. Does it work? Consider your intervention, figure out a way, and then evaluate and celebrate no matter what. I did one 2 years ago where I thought automaticity in language learning was going to be like the game changer and I was going to be writing books. Turns out it did not actually work out. And I think about like Daniel Willingham saying, like, I feel like he says something like, memory is the residue of thought. And I kind of went against that whole quote and I just wanted them to be automatic. But the celebration is that I didn't waste my time creating these automaticity materials for years and years and years. And when other teachers said, how did your automaticity thing go? I can say, you know what? It really didn't work. Maybe it would work in a different context, but it certainly did not work with me here. And so I really encourage, anyone to do it. And I can put my name in the chat, my email. to collaborate because this is a really these projects are kind of like a passion of mine at this point. And I would be really excited to, to work with anybody and share more about my own. So, um, I wanted to leave it at 30 minutes and then leave time for questions or comments. So that's where I'm going to end my spiel. I see that there's some stuff in the chat. So, is there any questions that anybody has or any comments? Like I would love to share, anything that I can.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Did you get any pushback from the students about not writing while you were speaking during those 8 to 10 minutes? Or do you have any advice for, students that want to still just challenge that a little bit and maybe be doing a little doodling, etc.?
Great question. The challenge that I had were from actually my highest achieving students. They did not want to do it. And I basically had to say, like, look, if this doesn't work for you, eventually we'll go back. But I just want to try it, and like you're a part of it. And so my that's true. And I had students that certainly did. I would say two or three in that class really pushed me. But overall, most of them were okay with it. And in a way, like I don't want to say I gamified it, but it was kind of like, well, how much can you remember? So that's maybe something else that I did. But I would say that was my main one to kind of just take them. But most of them ended up doing it. They all ended up doing it. So, um, yeah. Let's see.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's terrific talk. Thank you. Um, did you find that who they partnered with in their discussion mattered?
That's a good question. So I changed their partners every chapter that I would do. So I can't necessarily say that. Um, I think one of the differences that I'm thinking of two particular students in there that I think would have the most trouble with the retrieval piece of it. And if they were ever partnered with a really strong student that had a really strong memory, and would they just be copying their notes? And I'll be honest with you, none that come out really, none really come to mind where the partner mattered. Because the main thing was it was pretty quick. I would say, okay, you have 1 minute to write and then 30 seconds to talk. And so usually because they're so used to having notes, they kind of wanted to get their notes done really quickly, and so they would do as much as they could. I don't know if I mentioned this. I would give the slides at the very end of the chapter. And so that also usually like relieved the pressure for them to be copying because I told them there's really no use in doing this. You're eventually going to get the slides. I'm just not giving it to you now because I want you to remember. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
I would just be very surprised if the partner didn't matter, but maybe I'm thinking about longer sharings. I I think that for a kid who was uh, much more auditory in their learning style, or one who was really, I would think the partners could really be supportive, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
oh, like you could leverage the
Yeah,
partnership.
yeah, yeah.
That's, you know what, that's something I didn't really think about, but I will think about that for sure. And I have your name. And so if I'm gonna do some like deep thought on that tonight and kind of relook at my notes during that, and then I can contact you if you don't mind.
Not at all. And but thank you. It was really a very good talk.
Thank you.
I've done a lot of work with teacher research, and this is very much the way um, a research question can build. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you
Um,
have any students? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Did you have any students that previously did not take any notes, and how did they fare with this strategy? Because I find that often it's like assessing their memory instead of like helping them to increase their memory. I teach in a school where nobody would take notes, and so curious.
I definitely had students who did not take notes, and in a way, this was a kind of it was a forced activity because I'm teaching kids who are in 10th grade, and for as much as I wanted them to take notes, I would often be like, you're big kids, especially where I am. So it became almost like a class activity more than just like a note-taking exercise. So everyone was taking notes for it, and I would say for the ones that didn't, like for the handful that I didn't have, it forced them to actually to do something because it became a class activity. Yeah. Uh,
We have about 5 minutes left.
okay. I see hands up. Is it Megan has her hand up?
Yeah, my question was, well, first off, I teach eighth grade English. My question is, every time I have my students take any notes, their biggest thing is, what do I write down? What do I write down? What do what do you want me to copy? So they really, really struggle with, taking the important parts. So I'm thinking this might help with some of that, but I don't know. I'm just trying to think how that would all put together.
So that's a good question, and I totally understand because a lot of these kids were in ninth grade and it's similar. They don't totally know. The one piece that comes out would be I would do the share out after so they would do the notes and they would talk, and then I would say like, okay, what are some of the key things that came up? And when I would do that, I would be like, okay, good. So like I would also guide them and they could revise as we were doing the share out. Um, but I would say probably that was one of the more important pieces, especially at the beginning, is doing that share out where you can say like, you don't have to copy this down, but like, what are the important pieces that you remember? What are the important pieces your partner remembers? And then like as a class, like what are maybe like four key things? And you as the teacher can be like, key thing number one, key thing number two. So that would be my advice on that. Maybe you might have not been looking for, advice, but that's what I would probably say.
Yeah, because I was thinking it might actually, in the end, help with two things. Help with retrieval and help with them finding the important parts to write down.
Totally.
So, okay,
Yeah.
awesome, thanks.
Yep.
Andrew, I have another related question to that.
Sure.
So when the students were taking the notes in their 1 minute increments, now is that something that you had them keep in a notebook and then they had those also to refer back to, or did they just use your slides?
They did that in a notebook. They did that in their notebook. So they had their notes that they were writing down in a notebook, and then the notes with their partners in a notebook. So, and then the slides would come at the very end that I would give to them digitally. So that was kind of the logistical piece of that. I think Elizabeth has had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also a language teacher, TESOL professional for 25 years. I've seen a lot. I was wondering if you used just retrieval of, the lesson you just taught, in language teaching, there's a lot of research on spaced retrieval.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering if you ever tried, like, think back to the lesson a week ago. And if you did you see a difference with the retrieval versus the spaced retrieval?
So, great question. That is actually the design of my project this fall, is spaced retrieval. Um, so I've thought about it a lot. I don't know how it works, but that is coming soon. So I love the idea, and if you're thinking about it, please, I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah,
And I would
awesome.
love to talk more about that because that's something. That's my email. I would love to, talk and collaborate on that because that's the exact project that I'm conceiving
Yeah,
right now.
it's a little bit surprising to me that like Europe has been on this for so long and we're just like, what happened to us, you
Yeah,
know?
I know.
So because I went to a conference from that was run by European researchers and got hooked on it and was finding that not a lot of people here are doing it or had heard about it. So cool. Thank you
Yeah,
so
of
much.
course. Um, The only question that I see, and I'll be honest, it comes from Karen wrote it in the chat. What are some of the other strategies from the book you implemented and found successful? Um, Karen, if you don't mind, I can write to you. I would rather, instead of me kind of guessing, I'd actually rather my book copy is like just over there. I would rather actually look at my notes from the book and contact you directly. So I just wrote down your name to reach out to you to kind of give you my highlights. I actually did like a PD for our teachers based in this book. I could even just share the slides. I have like my 10 takeaways from Uncommon Sense Teaching.
That
So
would
I
be
could share
amazing.
that.
I'm an instructional coach and I'm wanting to share with teachers at my school. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. So thank you.
I will find that slideshow and I'll send it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Do you
Um,
need my email address or would they have you have it available?
Um, if you can put it in the chat, that would be
Yes.
wonderful.
Thank
Andrew, if people wanted to reach out, is email the best way? Do you have a Substack that they can follow you on? Or is email
I
really the best way to
do
get in
I
touch with you?
do have a Substack.
Okay.
Email's the best way to get in touch with me though. That's like
Okay.
I like live off of my email, so I would say
Okay.
email is the best way. And
Perfect.
then if you're interested in my Substack, where I kind of like write this stuff up, I can reply to you in an email. I probably should have done a slide like that. I didn't think about
Yeah,
that.
if you put it in the chat, or if you or can link it, that would be great if that's
Okay. I'm
possible.
gonna stop my share
Yeah,
and then
excellent.